Welcome to Echoes of the Silk Road, a place where mystery, legend, and the unknown intertwine. From chilling encounters to forgotten folklore, every story is a step deeper into the shadows of history and imagination. If you enjoy unraveling the eerie and unexplained, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. And now, let's begin our journey down the Silk Road. Story 1: The Stairs That Wait. The trail was exactly what they had hoped for: isolated, untouched, free from the usual crowds. Adrian and Leela had been hiking for years, always chasing trails that weren't on the maps, places where nature remained raw and undisturbed. Ridgeback Hollow was one of those places. They had heard whispers about it from an old hiking forum, a post buried deep in a thread titled, "Trails You Won't Find Again." No signs, no markings. You either find it by accident or you don't find it at all. It sounded like nonsense, just another urban legend coming from outdoorsmen. But then Adrian found an old topographical map, one that marked a faint, forgotten path deep in the national forest. It wasn't listed on any modern maps. That only made it more appealing. They started early, the morning sun casting golden light through the trees, the scent of damp moss and pine thick in the air. The pine was overgrown but still walkable, winding through a dense canopy of towering oaks and skeletal birches. Their footsteps crunched over damp leaves and broken twigs, the occasional chirp of unseen birds breaking the silence. At first, everything was peaceful. Then, about 2 miles in, something changed. The forest grew denser. The branches above twisted together, blocking out more and more of the light. The air grew still. Even their footsteps seemed muffled. Adrian slowed, his fingers tightening around the straps of his backpack. "You feel that?" Leela frowned. "Feel what?" He hesitated. The words sounded ridiculous, but like the air's heavier. She gave a small, uneasy laugh. "It's just the forest. It's thicker. Let's keep going." So they did. Another mile passed before they found the clearing, and in the middle of it, a staircase. It stood alone, rising about 15 feet into the air before abruptly ending in nothing. No building, no ruins, just a perfectly intact wooden staircase, standing where no staircase should be. Leela stopped walking. "What the hell?" Adrian couldn't answer. The wood wasn't old or decayed. It was pristine, smooth, polished steps, no dirt, no leaves, as if it had been placed there just yesterday. Leela circled around it. "Maybe it's a part of an old watchtower?" Adrian shook his head. "There's no foundation, no beams. It's just standing." The silence was deeper now. Adrian stepped closer, inspecting the base of the staircase. There was no moss, no insects. It was like nature had refused to touch it. Then, Leela put her foot on the first step. Adrian's pulse spiked. "Wait!" But she was already stepping up. "Just a couple steps," she said. "I want to see." She took another step, then another. By the time she reached the fifth step, Adrian felt it. A shift, a pressure drop. The air grew thick, humming with something he couldn't name. Leela froze, her breath hitched, her fingers tightening at her sides. Leela? Adrian's voice was barely above a whisper. Her head turned slowly. And then she looked past him, not at him, past him. Her pupils shrank, her lips parted. She was seeing something, something behind him. Adrian's body went cold. Every instinct screamed at him not to turn around. Leela, get down now. She didn't move. Her breath came in quick, shallow bursts. Her fingers twitched at her sides. Adrian grabbed her wrist. The moment her foot left the fifth step, the air snapped. Sound rushed back. Birds, wind, distant rustling in the trees. Leela stumbled backward, nearly collapsing. Adrian caught her, heart hammering against his ribs. She was trembling. Adrian's grip tightened. What did you say? Leela's lips trembled. Her skin was pale, her eyes focused. Then she stopped and slowly turned her head back toward the staircase. It was gone. The clearing was empty. The forest stretched out where the staircase had been, untouched. No footprints, no disturbed earth. It was like it had never been there. Adrian pulled her forward, walking fast, practically dragging her. We're leaving. They didn't stop walking. Not when the forest felt too still. Not when the whispers started. Not even when they passed another clearing and saw a second staircase, identical to the first. But this time, someone was standing at the top. A figure, motionless, watching. Leela's grip on his arm tightened. Adrian? She whispered. But he didn't answer, because when the figure moved, it moved exactly like him. And when it spoke, it used his voice. Adrian! The world snapped. The last thing he saw before the trees swallowed them whole was the figure's smile. Too wide. Too familiar. Story 2. The fog that took them. Elias adjusted the straps on his backpack, feeling the familiar weight press against his shoulders as he and Marie moved deeper into the Ridgeway Trail. The air was fresh, crisp, with a scent of pine and damp earth. The ground beneath them was firm, pocketed with softened dirt by fallen leaves, their edges curling from the onset of autumn. Overhead, the tree canopy stretched like skeletal fingers, golden light filtering through the gaps, creating shifting patterns across the forest floor. It was beautiful, but something felt wrong. Elias couldn't pinpoint it at first. Maybe it was the way the trees seemed taller here, and possibly so, their trunks stretching endlessly upward as if trying to escape the ground. Maybe it was the silence, not the peaceful kind, but the unnatural kind, the kind where you expect to hear birds and rustling leaves, but instead, there's nothing. Marie must have felt it too. She glanced around, tucking a stray strand of hair behind her ear, her expression tight. It's quiet. Elias nodded. Too quiet. The trail twisted and turned, leading them over uneven ground, roots snaking across their path like veins in ancient skin. Every now and then, they passed fallen trees, their trunks splintered as if something huge had crashed them effortlessly. Still, They pressed on until the fog rolled in. It started subtly, wisps of white curling through the undergrowth, clinging to the base of the trees like smoke. At first, it looked almost beautiful, the way it shifted, weaving around their legs as they walked. But within minutes, it thickened. The trees ahead blurred, their shapes distorting into twisted shadows. The sky above faded into a dull, suffocating gray, stealing the warmth from the light. The ground beneath them, once firm and familiar, now felt different, softer, almost spongy, as if they were no longer walking on solid earth. Elias slowed his steps. This isn't normal. Marie exhaled sharply, rubbing her arms as if the air had suddenly turned cold. Let's turn back before we lose the trail. They turned, and the path was gone. Elias's stomach twisted. Where there should have been a clear dirt trail, there was only a tangle of roots and underbrush. No footprints, no sign they had ever walked that way. Marie's breath quickened. That's not possible. We just came from... A sound cut her off. A whisper. Not words, just the sound of something moving, shifting between the trees. Close enough to hear, but too far to see. Then came the laughter. Faint, distant. A soft chuckle carried on the air like someone overhearing a joke from another room. Elias froze. It was a sound he recognized. It was his own laughter. Marie stiffened beside him. A second laugh joined the first. Hers. But it wasn't right. The cadence was off. The tone just slightly too flat, too hollow, and apparently too rehearsed. It echoed around them, overlapping, repeating, as if the forest itself was mimicking them. Marie gripped his wrist. Elias, we need to go. He didn't argue. They moved quickly, choosing a direction at random, hoping, praying to find something familiar. The fog thickened, wrapping around them like a living thing. Shadows danced in the periphery of their vision, tall, thin shapes that flickered in and out of existence. They weren't alone. Then, Marie screamed. Elias spun just in time to see her being yanked backward into the fog. Her fingers clawed at the air, her eyes wide with terror. And then she was gone. Elias lunged forward. Marie! But the moment his foot crossed into the thickest part of the fog, everything changed. The air felt wrong. The silence was absolute. His heartbeat sounded muted. His breaths thick, like he was breathing through cloth. The trees no longer looked real, just black silhouettes painted against an empty sky. A hand touched his shoulder, cold, fragile, not human. He turned and saw Marie, but something was wrong. Her face was blank, her eyes wide, unblinking. Her pupils were gone, just endless, empty white. Her mouth opened, too wide, jaw stretching as if unhinged. And from the gaping darkness inside, Elias heard his own voice. Run. Then, he was standing back on the trail. The fog was gone. The forest was normal again. Sunlight filtered through the leaves. The ground was solid beneath his feet. Birds chirped. The wind whispered. Marie was beside him, gasping for breath. Elias grabbed her. What happened? What did you see? Her lips trembled. She shook her head violently. She wouldn't finish. She didn't have to, because when Elias looked up, past her shoulder, toward the entrance of the trail, he saw them. Two figures, a man and a woman, standing at the tree line, watching. They just looked like Elias and Marie. Same clothes, same backpacks, same faces, but their expressions were wrong. Their mouths were stretched into wide, lifeless grins. Their eyes were black pits. The other Elias raised a hand and waved. Then they stepped onto the trail. Elias's stomach dropped. His vision blurred, and the last thing he heard before everything ripped away was Marie's voice whispering, Elias, I don't think we made it out. Story 3. The Skinwalker Trail. The locals had warned them. The man at the gas station had been adamant. Stick to the marked trails. Don't go wandering off, and if you hear whistling, ignore it. Don't answer. Don't run. Just keep walking and don't look back. Sarah had laughed, brushing it off as a superstition. Noah had nodded, entertained but not convinced. But now, deep in the forest, with the last trace of cell service long gone, he wasn't so sure. The path they followed wasn't on any map. It had started as a narrow deer trail before widening into something more, something that looked man-made but felt wrong. The trees grew closer together here. Their twisted branches blocked out the late afternoon light. The air smelled stale, thick with the scent of rotting wood and something else, something metallic. Noah glanced at Sarah. She was walking just ahead, her ponytail swaying as she moved. He wanted to say something, to suggest turning back before dark. But she suddenly froze. He barely stopped in time before colliding with her. She was staring at the trail ahead. The dirt path was disturbed, deep claw marks carved into the ground, like something had been dragged. Noah swallowed hard. That's probably just a bear. Sarah didn't respond, because a bear wouldn't leave bare footprints. Human footprints, bare and bloody, leading into the trees. Noah exhaled slowly. We should go back. Sarah nodded, but something in her face had changed. Her shoulders were tense, her lips pressed into a thin line. They turned around, and the trail behind them was gone. Noah's stomach plummeted. The dirt path they had walked just minutes ago was now thick with undergrowth, the trees impossibly dense. Sarah spun in a circle, eyes wide. No, that's not possible. A branch snapped. Both of them whipped around. The trees stood still. The forest was silent. No wind, no birds, nothing. Then, whistling. It came from above them. Noah's breath caught in his throat. His mind screamed, That's not right. That's not right. That's just not right. The whistling was familiar, the same tune Sarah had been humming earlier. Sarah grabbed his wrist, her grip like ice. Noah, we need to go. They started moving fast, pushing through the tangled brush. The whistling followed, first behind them, then ahead of them, then right beside Noah's ear. His entire body went rigid. He didn't turn his head. He didn't breathe. But from the corner of his eye, he saw it. A figure walking alongside him, perfectly in step. His brain refused to process what he was seeing. It was Sarah. But Sarah was in front of him. And the thing beside him, it was smiling. The smile was too wide. The teeth too white. Then, in a voice that was almost his own, it whispered, "Noah, we need to go." The moment he blinked, it was gone. Noah broke into a run. Sarah was already ahead, sprinting blindly. Their breaths were ragged, their bodies crashing through the brush. The trees moved past them too fast, as if the forest itself was bending, stretching, trying to keep them in. The whistling grew louder. Something was running behind them, and fast. Faster than anything should be able to move. Noah could hear its breathing. Heavy, wet, wrong. Sarah let out a choked scream. The ground beneath them vanished. They fell, tumbling down a steep incline, dirt and leaves ripping at their skin, bodies hitting jagged rocks as they plummeted into the darkness. Then, silence. Noah gasped, his vision swimming, his body ached, his head pounding. Sarah lay a few feet away, barely moving. They had landed in a dry riverbed, the rocky floor biting into their skin. Above them, the trees swayed. And at the edge of the ridge, something stood watching. It was tall. Its body was stretched too thin. Its arms hung lower than they should. In its face, it had no face. Just smooth, pale skin, stretched where features should have been. But Noah could feel it smiling. Sarah whimpered beside him, her voice small. "Noah, it's still whistling." And it was. Low, mocking. The tune was different now. It was the song Noah's mother used to sing when he was a child. The thing crouched at the edge of the ridge, its head twitching unnaturally. Then, it moved. Down the incline. Toward them. Noah grabbed Sarah and ran. They didn't stop. Didn't think. Didn't breathe. They ran until their lungs burned, until their legs threatened to collapse beneath them, and then a road. The sight of cracked pavement felt impossible. They stumbled onto it just as headlights appeared in the distance. A truck. The driver, an older man with deep lines in his face, slowed, rolling down his window. His eyes flicked over them, taking in their torn clothes, the wild terror in their expressions. Noah and Sarah were gasping, shaking, painting back at the trees. But the man's face had already gone pale. "Jesus," he muttered. "You came out of there?" Noah couldn't answer. The man nodded toward the truck. "Get in, now." They didn't hesitate. As the truck pulled away, Sarah turned, glancing back at the trailhead. The forest was still. The trees were normal. But at the tree line, something was standing there, watching, still smiling. And then it raised a hand and waved. The echoes of the past still whisper in the dark, But for now, our journey ends here. If you've enjoyed this tale from the shadows, be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss what waits beyond the veil. Until next time, tread carefully and listen closely. The road is never truly silent.